Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Pinky with Kuwento Co. And I'm here today with Royal Sumikat, who wrote the chapter My Ancestor from the Great Beyond in the Kuwento Book, an anthology of Filipino stories and poems. So welcome today, Royal. Yay.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited. I'm so excited for this book too.
I'm so excited you're excited. You followed us through since the first submission in 2020. It's now 2023. It's 3 years later, and thank you for sticking by and being here.
Thank you.
So let's get right to it with your cuento. Tell us, what is your cuento about?
It is about how I met my great-grandfather through a series of events that, I think sent I wrote in the book that a ping to him. Because I was searching and because I was making an effort, it felt like he saw my efforts and then he reached out to me.
You'd never met your grandfather before, ever?
No, my great-grandfather passed away on the year that I was born. And so I've never met him at all.
Interesting. And had you ever seen photos of him or heard about him or anything about him?
I know nothing because my dad, I'm telling you, he says 5-6 words to me a week. And just because he's such a man of little words. And then, I'll hear something about my dad and I'll be like, how come I don't know about this? And his answers are always, well, you never asked. But how am I supposed to know what to ask when I don't know anything?
Right. How are we supposed to know what the questions are and how are we supposed to know, right? Well, that's a really good point in your story. You have that real great part in your story where it becomes staccato, right? It's I asked my dad, this is what my dad said, you got back to you. Tell us, kind of go back to that memory of what that was like when you were trying to get this information from your dad.
My dad said it so casually as if this is not a historical thing that a lot of diaspora Filipinos are trying to seek out. And he's like, oh yeah, my great grandfather, I think he was a POW. And I'm like, where? And he said Bataan. And I'm like, that is in American history books, right? How we should be honoring this. And he's like, oh yeah, okay. So it was so nonchalant and indifferent. And I'm just like, Dad, this is so important to us. Yeah.
And then you said 2 weeks before you were walking the march, right? Just your own version of a memorial march.
Yeah, Ate Christie mentioned, and this is also my fault. I should really be researching my history more as a Filipino. But there's apparently a Bataan Memorial Death March at New Mexico every year to honor the folks that perished there. And when it was canceled during COVID, I had the opportunity to kind of do an impromptu one when she decided to create one here in Houston because she still wanted to honor our ancestors. And I was down to participate in it. She actually gave me a little thing to pin on my water pack and it says I am marching for, and then there was a blank and she's like, write down the name of somebody that is serving in the military in your family right now, or a person who fought during World War II. And I had no idea, so I just put I am marching for my unnamed ancestors. And I think that's when that was ring ring Lolo.
Lola picked up that beeper. He saw your text message and he's like, I need to respond back. That's actually one of your photos, right? In that you submitted. That's part of your chapter here. I'm looking. It has you with your backpack, and it's right. It says my unnamed ancestors in a heart. Yeah. And then there's other photos as well. I see photos of the friends you had walked with, and even the gold medal that Ate Christie is holding, and then the owl.
Yeah, the owl. Oh my gosh. I am really big into animism. So are ancestors, so I take a lot of things in my environment as symbols or signs for things, and it has never failed me. And so when I saw that owl, I looked it up, what does that mean? And a lot of the messages that I saw for owl symbology was foretelling of great things to come, or something huge, sometimes catastrophic, could be death or whatever. And this was also during the beginning of COVID. So I'm just okay, well, we're already starting with the lockdown. So yeah.
That definitely was the bad omen, but also a good omen, right? Of being able to connect with your grandfather from the great beyond and, finding that information. I found it funny though, that your dad found it like this. He found the information so quickly.
I think it's so funny because my dad, again, doesn't say much, but you plant little seeds in him and then he goes off on his own thing and he'll be like, look what I've been looking. I'm like, wow, I didn't even think you cared because you were so nonchalant about it in our conversation. And he's over here doing an FBI search on Google. And so, I'm really grateful that my dad paid attention as well.
Does he know that you wrote this chapter about him and His
Oh yeah, he knows. And then I've taken the because we did get the gold medal, and he so he does know about this chapter because then he did the ceremony over Zoom. I think like he dressed up in it was so cute. It was so cute because it was no COVID times. And I had them read this. They were very, again, I don't know how proud they were. They are proud, just stone face.
So yeah, yeah, that is kind of classic. Yeah. So let me ask you. So why did you write this cuento? Like, what is the reason? What's the motivation? Out of all the stories in your life, why this particular one? And I'm sure our audience wants to know what's behind the scenes of it.
The story incorporates everything: adventure, mystery, magic. I mean, it feels like that is a story that is worth telling. I mean, I have a lot of stories, but nothing that's just like, this can't just be me, right? Like, this is magic, right? You know what I mean? I feel like a lot of magical things happen in my life, and it only happens where I'm the only one bearing witness. But there were other people like participating in this story that saw this happen and like come to fruition. And the fact that, I have tangible evidence that my ancestor was like, hey, I heard you wanted to get to know me. Here is a medal. And I'm just like, oh my God. So that's why I'm like, this is worth saying. This is worth telling. I've shown the, medal to other people, and like the backstory is just like, wow, that is intense.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that when people say that, the history's in the past, it's like, it's such a static kind of concept. But in this situation, it is true. History is living.
Yeah.
You're able to tap into it through the ancestral realm, through your family and what their knowledge of their own history. And then your curiosity, right? Like striking up a chord in your own self, saying like, I'm interested in this. I want to learn more. Because how many of us, even in our own families, are interested in this? Like I'm the freak in the family who's like wanting to learn more and more about, everyone in our history. So, thank you. They should thank you. Your family should thank you, for getting this. And your story is also connected to my story because it happened to me too. I was working on the Phil Vet Rep with Christy and helping lobby, going to Congress, walking those halls, telling those people like, you need to vote for this or you need to pass this. I didn't even know my own grandfather was in the military at all. Neither did my mom. Like, didn't really.
Wow.
And then they started, our parents talk to their relatives in the Philippines and they tell them what's happening with their kids. And they tell them about what I'm doing. And they're like, oh yeah, no, our father was in the military and he also has papers or whatever. So yeah, it's the same thing. So I got like the papers from relatives in the Philippines, and we were also able to get a medal just like you. So
I mean, everybody's grandpa or grandma, if they're Filipino, they had some sort of tie to the like World War II. I mean, the Japanese was there.
Yeah. And those emergency notes that you talk about, when I read my grandfather's papers, his military papers, that's exactly what they gave him as, I guess, compensation for working in the military. They gave emergency notes back to his family. They don't give him the money. They give back my grandfather's parents the money, but they were emergency notes is how they wrote it down. But I didn't connect emergency notes until your story when I read it. I'm like, oh, that makes sense.
Wow. See, that's wild. Cause like there's just breadcrumbs everywhere. And then we're just like piecing it all together because we're the one writing the story. And so we kind of have to be our own historians because no one's writing it.
You're absolutely right, Royal. I think this is why I've created Kuwento Co, is because I keep saying, yeah, we want to leave breadcrumbs, but don't we want to leave more than breadcrumbs? Don't we want to like leave the whole dinner package? Like we want them to know the full story in your perspective, in your words. And that's what I appreciate about your story, your words and your tone and the way you deliver it. Even, it's definitely not, formal APA language, which is exactly what I love because they hear Royal, they hear you. So probably years from now when like, you're a great Lola, right? Yeah. You're gonna be great Lola Royal's, story. Like, oh my God, I can hear Lola Royal like through this.
Wow. Yes. I don't even think that far ahead, but that's it. I love that.
Yeah. So what lessons did you learn from this cuento and even lessons that you learned in this writing process?
I learned, there's many lessons. I learned, first of all, like people want to read about it. I was just writing it for myself just so I could like, take note of this really interesting thing that I hope to remember forever. And then I posted it. And then, people read it and would like refer some of the content back to me. They were like, oh, this made me laugh. And I'm just like, whoa, you read that? That's a really long story. And I don't know why I'm like, no one's gonna read this, but like people were generally interested, and I was very surprised. So that made I learned that people want to read my story, and I'm so honored. thank you so much for people, you know. And the other thing was that like I have a pretty good connection to my ancestors. I think ancestors are like always waiting, like, hey, I wonder when she'll like, you know, connect. I feel like the ancestors are waiting in the sidelines, like, put me in, like, I want to support you, you know what I mean? Just like say it, you know? And so now I know, like, there's like thousands of them just wanting to support me. And there's always a sign that they're listening and paying attention and helping.
You know, and probably they were part of writing this story.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah, the whole time they're just like, you know, the Jesus meme. Like take the wheel, but it's my lolas and lolas.
What would my ancestors do, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So in terms of when you were writing it, you know, what was it hard? Was it difficult? Did it come out just flowing? What was it like?
Whenever I write, I just kind of say a bunch of things unhinged. And then I'll reread it. It's like, okay, that sounds ridiculous. And then, you know, that's when the editing process is. But most of the time I do try to write in my voice because that's also how I read it in my head and how I speak. And I don't want to tone it down to where it's like, where this doesn't sound like you. Yeah.
Yes, and you're definitely, y'all don't know, but you should look up Royal. She is a famous artist. People, we are in the presence of royalty in terms of artists, Filipinx artists. So, and your artistry is very colorful, at least the ones that I've seen. So it just makes sense that your writing is just as colorful.
It's so funny because I had an artist talk about my latest piece, and somebody goes, how does your artwork relate to your writing work? And then I'm like, writing work? And they were like, yeah, you know, all the stuff that you've written. And I'm like, I don't even consider myself like an author. And everybody was like, no, why would you say that? That's not true. And then they're like, oh, come on. And I was berated for feeling like I didn't think I was an author.
Wow.
I know. I know, but like it was Sybil, of course, that asked that question, and they were like, well, you know, Ro's a published artist. I don't know if y'all know a published author, and I'm like, stop. And so they had to take inventory for me, and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I have written some things that have been published, and I don't know why I never thought of myself as a writer.
And now people are going to read this story 10 times fold.
Yeah.
And for sure, they're going to want to ask you questions too. So, you know, so speaking of which, why should other people write and share their cuento like you just did? And specifically people who are just like you, why should they write and share their cuento?
Well, I mean, you just provided a good example. Was, you know, you were reading about your Lolo's emergency notes, and you didn't even think about it being, you know, the emergency gorilla money until you read my story. So I feel like we all need to be telling our stories, and then we're creating this web of like connections, like, oh my God, like this is why this, and that creates a fabric of the Filipino story as told by Filipinos. And also, why should we be writing for ourselves? Dang, I had another thing, but that is the main thing. And people want, this is what I was trying to come about. We think that a lot of like people in the diaspora or just like Filipino American people, I think they don't feel connected to being the Filipinos in the Philippines because we don't have like the, you know, indigenous story, or we don't have like growing up in the Philippines story, and we feel very lost. But then I've done an installation where it was like a giant balikbayan box, and so many people really connected with that, and that was our culture, that was our version of our Filipino history and our own stories. Even though I didn't participate, like I don't have like my indigenous roots anymore, or like I haven't lived in the Philippines for a long time, there is a culture outside of the Philippines that is still Filipino, and it's very specific to Filipinos living outside of the country. And I think we should honor that just as much as we honor indigeneity and living in the Philippines or growing up, you know, as a Filipino.
No, I completely resonate with what you just said. You know, like when you're in the Philippines, and I was born here in America, so I'm Filipino American, right? I don't have those stories growing up or being raised there, but my entire growing up here felt like I was raised as if I was, you know, in a Filipino community. So going back home, I really know that I'm American, or I really know I'm not just Filipino, but at the same time, it's like they're still my people and I'm still their people, so we're still connected. And then when I come home, that's when I really feel like, okay, yeah, I'm really Filipino. When I come back home here to Spring, Texas.
Exactly.
Well, is there anything you want to say to any of our folks who will be watching, you know, this interview? What do you have to say to them?
I have a lot of doubts and fears about stories and insecurities that maybe I'm faking it or I'm not like I'm telling it wrong. And so I've just learned to like say what happened to me. That is my story, and hopefully what makes it more authentic for others is the relatedness that people feel whenever they hear my story. I used to be like, I need to know all of the Filipino history as it happened in the Philippines, but I wasn't connected to it. And so I'm like, well, I can't tell my art through a thing that I'm not connected to. So I'm just going to talk about myself. And then somehow people connect. And I think that's how you become more authentic.
Yeah. You are drawing from your own personal well, which is all that you know. So it's definitely not fake. It's always going to be true. And people always connect to something that's so pure and so true,
Yeah.
versus
Yeah.
like, faking it and like creating a brand around it or
Yeah.
whatever the case may be. But as long as you share it yourself, which is what you did, here, at least in this particular writing, yeah, it's so many people are going to connect on it. And it's like, you did a bit of a history run in your writing. You went down through numbers and how many people and like, so it was really a fun way to learn history. It was a fun way to learn about World War II in a more personal light. And I wish we could teach that more to the younger students, or not even just all people, to learn history in this way, the way you have expressed it. Can you imagine if a youth in school read this instead of like their social studies chapter on World War
Yeah,
II?
memorizing dates, like that was not ever interesting for me. I don't know anything after when did what happen. I just know like, the general thing was like people fought, there was death, and it's like, we have to be connected to people and not just the numbers.
Yeah, but guess what? You remember the number maybe when you and your family immigrated.
Yeah,
right?
of
So
course.
that's a number that's important, that we should ask those numbers. And then how does that connect to maybe the historical context of what we're teaching, in school for our youth, and then they're like,
Right.
oh, okay, if my family immigrated here in 1970s and that was right after the 1965
Yeah.
Immigration Act. Okay, well, what does that mean for you? And just kind of
Oh
being
my
able to
gosh.
feel that.
I actually had a thing that connected with me like that. There was like we immigrated to Saudi Arabia in 1992, and then I was thinking growing up I would be like, my mom was like, someday we'll move with your dad, because I would be like, I want to be with dad. Like, why are we living here and why is he over there? And she would always be like, someday we'll be able to be with him. Like, I promise you. And I felt very impatient. And then it's like we moved in 1992, and I'm like, why did it take this long? And it took that long because there was a literal Gulf War happening, and he's not going to try to immigrate his family in a really precarious situation. And so it's like, oh, he moved us like after the war ended.
So he moved your family from the Philippines to
Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia after the Gulf War. Oh, and then you all moved here.
We stayed in Saudi Arabia for 3 years, and then we moved here. Yeah.
And specifically here in Texas, in Houston?
Yep. We've lived here in America, in Houston, since we moved here.
Yeah, and you're Houstonian now at this point.
Yeah. I don't want to admit it, but I feel like my family in the Philippines are like, no, yeah, you're Houstonian.
And where your family in the Philippines, where are you from? Where's your roots in the Philippines?
My mom's family lives in Butuan, and then my dad's family lives in I think they live in Leyte. A lot of them also live in Manila. So we're kind of scattered around, but there's like Mindanao and Luzon. Yeah.
And you are from?
I was born in Makati, and then I've lived in Las Piñas until I was 6, and then we moved.
City girl.
City girl, all my life.
Yeah, that's what my mom said. She's from Manila, but you're right. Her family's from also like Visayan, like Samar, near Leyte. So, everyone is from somewhere usually when they're in Manila, right? They're usually from somewhere else.
Exactly.
And so I'm so glad you wrote this story. It's so timely, right? It was happening during the pandemic. It's like post-pandemic right now, right? And then also, I guess before we leave, have you had any more connections with your ancestors since this?
Well, I gained a new ancestor. It was my dad. My dad passed away last year. I do feel connected to my dad still. Miss him every day, but like there's so many things that I'm just like, okay, that's dad for sure, and I think, and I feel like I'm glad that even though I've missed him so much, like I am so lucky to have him as an ancestor, because he was so powerful and majestic in his lifetime. I could just imagine what he could do, like unfiltered, ethereally, Yeah.
Oh, that is so sweet. And I didn't know that. I'm so sorry for your loss and your family loss. I feel when you're talking about him, we're talking about this story, I feel he's alive. Like, I really thought, I'm about to call up Tito Merlito and be like,
he was, yeah, I know. And so this is why I'm so glad that he read the story. And like, I feel like a lot of my really important stories about, you know, my identity and being Filipino was shaped by my dad's big decisions for the family, you know, like moving, you know, him sending money from Saudi Arabia, him moving us after the Gulf War, you know, like him moving us another country to, you know, to Texas. And it's just like, he was a very important part of my life. And it's like, not just my life, but like the Filipino community that we're a part of. And so I guess I dedicated the story to him and my ancestors on my father's side, because that's also my great grandfather. Like that's my dad's grandfather. Yeah.
Well, folks, it's been great listening to Royal's story and all the juicy background story of this, and all the ancestors that are watching over her and all of us as well. So I just want to thank you so much, Royal, for your time and for this amazing interview. And folks, if you haven't read her chapter yet, please pick up the book, the Kuwento Book, an anthology of Filipino stories and poems. All right, stay tuned for more interviews, listening to more cuentos. Y'all have a great day. All right, bye.